Welcome to our next module. In this module, we'll be discussing interstate relations, really the parts of the Constitution, Article 4, that address interstate relations. If you remember from our previous modules talking about life under the Articles of Confederation, the states came together collectively for economic and military security, but they didn't necessarily play nice with each other, especially when it came to economics. So these parts of the Constitution were trying to address how states interacted to address some of those ills. So let's get started. Full faith and credit clause, right? Requires states to honor the final civil rulings of other states. We typically think of this in terms of marriage and divorce. That's the quick and dirty way of explaining this. If you move from one state to another, that doesn't mean you need to remarry someone or re-divorce someone, if that's a word at all. Now, one thing about this I find very interesting is that I started teaching this class in 1999, about 20 years. And even back then, what we were seeing were some states having constitutional amendments allowing for same-sex marriage and some that were denying it. Now, the Supreme Court, for some reason, just hasn't touched it really until the mid-2010s. And so when it comes to this, we know based on the full faith and credit clause, something's got to give. I mean, if one state allows it, then another state should allow it as well based on this, right? So again, that's something the Supreme Court is finally starting to address and define that area of law. All right. Next, privileges and immunities clause, also Article 4, Section 1. Guarantees fundamental rights of citizens from other states. The intent of this clause was really to make sure that non-citizens of a given state were not discriminated against, right? And so along those lines, that, that there are certain fundamental rights that are guaranteed as such. All right. Now, one thing about it, this does not extend to licensure, for example, attorneys, doctors, and the like. The interstate rendition clause, Article 4, Section 2. Really, this is dealing with extradition. If someone flees from one state to another, they can be returned to the original state from which they fled. All right. Next, interstate compacts. This is a means of resolving interstate disputes. Now, normally, interstate compacts are approved by Congress, right? So, if you think about it as an example of that, the Port Authority of Newark, New Jersey. In that case, it doesn't really make walk around sense to have two states have their own port authorities for what amounts to be the same area, right? I mean, just that's commonsensical. However, when you have two states that come together like that, what does that really entail? Interstate commerce. States aren't authorized to do that. So that's why Congress has to get involved with this. That's why Congress can bless those interstate compacts where really they don't have to get involved, but they have to at least say, yes, that is okay. All right. And lastly, original jurisdiction. We will be talking about jurisdiction in an upcoming module, but this is very, very specific as it relates to relationships between the states. For state disputes between states, the Supreme Court is the first and last court that will hear those disputes, right? So the Supreme Court is the trial court for that. So if Virginia sues Maryland or Pennsylvania sues New Jersey, boom, it doesn't go through any district court or court of appeals, it goes straight to the U.S. Supreme Court. Matter of fact, even locally, I remember several years ago, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Utilities, they were about ready to start selling water to Kannapolis. Now, just to let you know, Charlotte's in the Catawba River Basin. Kannapolis, even though it's close by, is in the Yadkin River Basin. That's a big deal, moving water from one river basin to another. Now, that was also during the time of a drought. And so the state of South Carolina got wind of this and sued the state of North Carolina to cease and desist, saying that moving that water outside of the Catawba River Basin would adversely affect their communities and business. boom, it was on the docket for the U.S. Supreme Court. Yeah, pretty much almost immediately. Now, in that case, as just a corollary to some other things we've discussed in these previous modules, yeah, at some point, North Carolina, South Carolina made nice, and SEMA did not transfer water to Kannapolis, and so now there was no dispute, so it got moved from the Supreme Court docket. But the point being, when there is a dispute between states, it goes immediately to the Supreme Court for resolution. All right, with that, that's the end of this module. As always, go back and review it as necessary. And with that, we will see you in our future module coming up.